Hi, welcome to this edition of Book Break. My name is Roger, and for Banned Book Week, I'll be sharing with you a little bit of The Witches by Roald Dahl. It is geared toward about grades 4 and up. With that said, let's get started. This chapter is called How to Recognize a Witch. The next evening, after my grandmother had given me a bath, she took me once again into the living room for another story. "Tonight," the old woman said, "I'm going to tell you how to recognize a witch when you see one." "Can I always be sure?" I asked. "No," she said, "you can't, and that's the trouble. But you can make a pretty good guess." "In the first place," she said, "a real witch is certain always to be wearing gloves when you meet her." "Surely not always," I said. "What about in the summer when it's hot?" "Even in the summer," my grandmother said, "she has to. Do you know why?" "Why?" I said. "Why?" "Because she doesn't have fingernails. Instead of fingernails, she has thin, curvy claws like a cat, and she wears the gloves to hide them." Mind you, lots of very respectable women wear gloves, especially in the winter, so this doesn't help you very much at all. "Mama used to wear gloves," I said. "Not in the house," my grandmother said. "Witches wear gloves in the house. They only take them off when they go to bed." "How do you know all this, Grandma?" "Don't interrupt me," she said. "Just take it all in. The second thing to remember is that a real witch is always bald." "Bald?" I said. "Bald as a boiled egg," my grandmother said. I was shocked. There was something indecent about a bald woman. "Why are they bald, Grandma?" "Don't ask me why," she snapped. "But you can take it from me that not a single hair grows on a witch's head." "How horrid!" "Disgusting," my grandmother said. "If she's bald, she'll be easy to spot," I said. "Not at all," my grandmother said. "A real witch always wears a wig to hide her baldness. She wears a first-class wig, and it is almost impossible to tell a really first-class wig from ordinary hair unless you give it a pull to see if it comes off." "That's what I'll have to do," I said. "Don't be foolish," my grandmother said. "You can't go around pulling at hair of every lady you meet, even if she is wearing gloves. Just try it and see what happens." So that doesn't help me much either," I said. "None of these things is any good on its own," my grandmother said. "It's only when you put them all together that they begin to make a little sense. Mind you," my grandmother went on, "these wigs do cause a rather serious problem for witches." "What problem, Grandma?" "They make the scalp itch most terribly," she said. "You see, when an actress wears a wig, or if you or I wear a wig, we would be putting it on over our own hair, but a witch has to put it straight onto her naked scalp. And the underneath of that wig is always very rough and scratchy. It sets up a frightful itch on the bald skin. It causes nasty sores on the head, wig rash, the witches call it, and it doesn't half itch." "What other things must I look for to recognize a witch?" I asked. "Look for the nose holes," my grandmother said. "Witches have slightly larger nose holes than ordinary people. The rim of each nose hole is pink and curvy, like the rim of a certain kind of seashell." "Why do they have such big noses?" I asked. "For smelling with," my grandmother said. "A real witch has the most amazing powers of smell. She can actually smell out a child who is standing on the other side of the street on a pitch-black night." "She couldn't smell me," I said. "I just had a bath." "Oh, yes, she could," my grandmother said. "The cleaner you happen to be, the more smelly you are to a witch." That can't be true," I said. "An absolutely clean child gives off the most ghastly stench to a witch," my grandmother said. The dirtier you are, the less you smell. But that doesn't make sense, Grandma. Oh, yes, it does, my grandmother said. It isn't the dirt that the witch is smelling. It's you. The witch smells everything. The smell that drives a witch mad actually comes right out of your own skin. It comes oozing out of your skin in waves. And these waves, stink waves, the witches call them, go floating through the air and hit the witch right smack in her nostrils. They send her reeling. Now, wait a minute, Grandma. Don't interrupt, she said. The point is, when you haven't washed for a week and your skin is all covered all over with dirt, then quite obviously the stink waves cannot come oozing out so strongly. Well, I shall never have a bath again, I said. Just don't have one too often, my grandmother said. Once a month is quite enough for a sensible child. It was at moments like this that I loved my grandmother more than ever. Grandma, I said, if it's a dark night, how can a witch smell the difference between a child and a grown-up? Because grown-ups don't give off stink waves, she said. Only children do that. But I don't really give off stink waves, do I? I said. I'm not giving them out at the moment, am I? Not to me. To me, my grandmother said, you are smelling like raspberries and cream. But to a witch, you would be smelling absolutely disgusting. What would I be smelling of? I asked. Dog droppings, my grandmother said. I reeled. I was stunned. Dog droppings? I cried. I am not smelling of dog droppings. I don't believe it. I won't believe it. What's more, my grandmother said, speaking with a touch of relish, to a witch, you'd be smelling of fresh dog droppings. That simply is not true, I cried. I know I am not smelling of dog droppings, stale or fresh. There's no point in arguing about it, my grandmother said. It's a fact of life. I was outraged. I simply couldn't believe myself to believe what my grandmother was telling me. So, if you see a woman holding her nose as she passes you in the street, that woman could easily be a witch. I decided to change the subject. Tell me what else to look for in a witch, I said. The eyes, my grandmother said. Look carefully at the eyes, because the eyes of a real witch are different from yours and mine. Look in the middle of each eye, where there is normally a black dot. If she is a witch, the black dot will keep changing colors, and you will see fire, and you will see ice dancing right in the very center of the colored dot. It will send shivers running all over your skin. My grandmother leaned back in her chair. Are there other things? I asked. Of course there are other things. You don't seem to understand that witches are not actually human beings at all. They look like humans, they talk like humans, and they are able to act like humans, but in actual fact, they are totally different animals. They are demons in human shape. That is why they have claws and bald heads, and strange noses and peculiar eyes, all of which they have to conceal as best they can from the rest of the world. What else is different about them, Grandma? The feet, witches never have toes. No toes, I cried. Then what do they have? They just have feet. The feet have square ends with no toes on them at all. Does that make it difficult for them to walk? I asked. I mean, why doesn't she wear wide, comfy shoes with square ends? She dare not. Just as she hides her baldness with her wig, she must also hide her ugly feet by squeezing them into pretty shoes. Oh, that must be terribly uncomfortable, I said. Extremely uncomfortable. But she has to put up with it. If she's wearing ordinary shoes, it won't help me recognize her, will it, Grandma? I'm afraid it won't. You might possibly see her limping very slightly, but only if you are watching closely. Are those the only differences then, Grandma? There's one more, my grandma said, just one more. What is it, Grandma? They're spit. It's blue. Blue, I cried, not blue. Their spit can't be blue. Blue as a blueberry, she said. You don't mean it, Grandma. Nobody can have blue spit. Witches can, she said. Is it like ink, I asked. Exactly. They even use it to write with. They use those old-fashioned pens, and they simply lick the nib. Can you notice the blue spit, Grandma? If a witch was talking to me, would I be able to notice it? Only if you look carefully, my grandmother said. If you looked very carefully, you would probably see a slight bluish tinge on her teeth, but it doesn't show much. I couldn't believe what my grandmother was telling me, but I knew she wasn't lying to me. She went to church every morning of the week, and she said grace before every meal. And somebody who did that would never tell lies. I was beginning to believe every word she spoke. So there you are, my grandmother said. That's about all I can tell you. And that is Witches by Roald Dahl. Check it out. It's a great read. All right, I'll see you again very soon. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at youthservices@olpl.org. Thank you.